Chapter 8, Key Issue 4, is about why states cooperate and compete with each other. And so you'll be looking at the principal alliances in Europe during the Cold War. We'll look at the economic alliances in Europe and since the World War II. And we'll explain terrorism, and we'll talk about how states have sponsored terrorism. So again, we're looking for overall patterns. Remember that here, instead of looking at exact details in political geography, for this level, you guys are looking at spatial patterns and spatial connections. So during the Cold War, the world was kind of divided into whether you were in the U.S. camp or the Soviet Union camp. And so we had organizations called, of military cooperation called NATO. NATO stood for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it included the U.S., Canada, and 14 other European states. And that was counterbalanced by the Warsaw Pact, and that was a military agreement among the Eastern Bloc, or the communist Eastern European countries. And they agreed to defend each other in case of an attack. So this kind of precariously balanced power in the world had two main objectives. So the NATO's objective was to prevent the spread of communism by the Soviet Union. And the Warsaw Pact's objective was to provide the Soviet Union a buffer of allied states between it and Germany to discourage a third German invasion of the Soviet Union. Once the Cold War was over, it was disbanded. The Warsaw Pact was. NATO is still in effect. We also have economic supranational organizations. Again, supranational means that it has more than one or two states working together, right? It's supranational, larger than a national movement. So the European Union was formed in 1958. It has members like Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and West Germany. And its initial purpose was to heal Western Europe's scars from World War II and provide financial assistance for each other. A similar group was formed in the Eastern Bloc. It was the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance. It was formed in 1949, and its members included 7 Eastern European communist states from the Warsaw Pact, in addition to Cuba, Mongolia, and Vietnam. And its purpose was to promote trade and the sharing of natural resources between communist nations. If you look at this map here in 1980 and in 2013, you can see the change in the world that we talked about a little earlier in this chapter. So with the fall of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall, really the alliances and the map changed. So things like Yugoslavia split apart, the USSR split apart and became like 15 different countries, right? We talked about some of the tensions and the ethnic conflicts when Yugoslavia broke apart. But also alliances changed. People built new ones. So if you look at this map here, you've got green states that are members of both NATO and the EU. The dark green states are just in NATO. Here you've got the Republic of Ireland, that's just EU only. And then here you have countries that are Warsaw Pact countries and ComCon. And then here in 2013, much later, you can see that way more countries, right, have joined both NATO and the EU. There's a few countries that have stayed members of only NATO. There's a few countries that have become members of only the EU, like they were joined by Austria, Finland, and Sweden. And then there is no Warsaw Pact or ComCon anymore. And you can see a few places like Russia and the Ukraine, Moldova, they are not part of either NATO or the EU, and that has led to current tensions in the world. So the EU expanded to 12 countries during the 80s, and now it's expanded to 27 in 2000s, and the main task of the EU is to promote economic development within its member states through economic and political cooperation. The Eurozone was the most dramatic step, and it was integrating Europe's nation states into a regional organization. They have a European central bank, and it settled interest rates, trying to minimize inflation, and it established a common currency called the euro. The United Kingdom did not use the euro, but it was a member of the EU. And a little over a year ago, they voted to exit the European Union, and we're still kind of waiting to see how that process will look and what effect it will have for a country to leave the EU. When you have a supranational organization, break apart, or if you have like a large multinational or multi-ethnic state break apart, you call that de-evolution. So with the United Kingdom leaving the EU, that is called de-evolution. It's the breaking apart of that large organization. The breakup of Yugoslavia could also be like the de-evolution of a multinational state or a multi-ethnic state. And many times, de-evolution is caused by a rise in a nationalist movement. And we know that nationalism is a centripetal force, right? It's something that's bringing you together. But a nationalist movement can actually be a centrifugal force because it's going to split things apart. It's going to do the opposite. So in this case, instead of bringing the UK and Europe closer together, a nationalist movement in the United Kingdom led to them wanting to be more of an isolationist country. And the result was they left the EU. And that was called Brexit. So if you've heard people refer to Brexit, that's a process called de-evolution. So we couldn't look at political geography in the world without looking at terrorism. So terrorism is the systematic use of violence by a group in order to intimidate a population or to coerce a government into granting its demands. Some distinctive characteristics of terrorists include they try to achieve their objects through organized acts of terror, bombings, kidnappings, hijackings, taking of hostages, and assassinations. They view violence as a way to bring widespread publicity to their cause. And terrorists believe in a cause so strongly they attack, even though they know that they will probably die or get caught in the act. And this differs from other acts of political violence because many acts of political violence, like an act of aggression, that would be considered like a military act of aggression, the aggression would be aimed at the military or a political leader. Terrorism often aims its attacks at ordinary people in a way to spread more fear. So terrorists are more likely to pick civilian targets than a military force would. A military force would be picking a political leader or the military itself to attack. So here you see the World Trade Towers on 9/11 when they suffered from a terrorist attack when people flew the planes into the buildings. Here the first plane had been already flown in, and here the second plane is attaching to the second Twin Tower. And sometimes you receive state support for terrorism. And so several Middle Eastern states have supported terrorism in recent years. And there are 3 increasing levels of involvement. So some states have provided sanctuary for terrorists that are wanted by other countries. So Afghanistan and probably Pakistan have provided sanctuary for al-Qaeda terrorists. Some states supply weapons, money, and intelligence to terrorists. And some plan attacks using terrorists. So there's different levels of support a state can give. When you look at supplying terrorists, both Iraq and Iran have been accused of providing material and financial supports of terrorists, although the extent of the involvement is controversial. Iraq asserted, the U.S. asserted that Saddam Hussein had close links to al-Qaeda. And in Iran, the U.S. accused Iran of harboring al-Qaeda members, trying to gain influence in Iraq. And the U.S. and other countries fear Iran's development of a nuclear program, and how if that nuclear program led to nuclear weapons, they would share those with terrorists as well. So overall, the Earth's land is divided into nearly 200 states, so it's impossible to find a perfect match between the boundaries of a state and the area inhabited by a single ethnicity. Some states are separated by physical boundaries, and some are separated by cultural boundaries. And competition between states has been replaced by economic alliances. So sometimes you can reduce competition by establishing a system of economic cooperation like the EU, or a military pact like NATO. And that's it.